Jump back into the Didache. So we were up to the commandments, the second commandment of the teaching, which is a list of a bunch of commandments, which uh, has a lot in common with the Ten Commandments. We'll so kind of. Did anybody actually get out the Ten Commandments and compare them to this? Well, you're going to do it now. So we talked about these first ones. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't corrupt boys, which there is not one in the New Testament to equal that. Do not engage in sexual immorality. Fornication is the word there, porneia. Do not steal. And do not practice magic or use potions. So that, while not part of the Ten Commandments, is part of the Levitical law in the Old Testament. And then this one, which is also not directly in the New Testament, do not murder an unborn child in the womb or kill a newborn. So a direct commandment not to have abortion, not to do abortion. So also something that had it made its way into the New Testament specifically might have been helpful in our day. So that's the first half of this. So just thought I'd show you what this actually looks like. Instead of do not, it's simply not. That's the Greek word for not. So it's not murder, not adultery, not corrupt boys. So in English, it makes more sense to make it do not, because it is the same kind of a statement. So these are the things you are not supposed to do. All right, here's the second section. Do not desire that which is your neighbor's, which is one of the Ten Commandments. We generally see the King James Version word here. Do not covet that which is your neighbor's. Do not commit perjury. So these commandments here, these two are very similar. Do not commit perjury is in essence the same as do not lie. But it's both of these have the same idea behind them in that they're very specific. It's not just day-to-day lying, because while that's not good, the really bad thing is when you get somebody in trouble and lie on them as you would in court. Accuse them of doing something that will lead to negative consequences for them when it's not really true. Bearing false witness is directly that. Making up a story and getting somebody killed, thrown in jail, whatever, because of it.
No, I ain't got a chance.
And then this one, do not curse, not saying curse words, but do not speak evil of someone. This one is, this particular idea is actually repeated by Jesus when he talks about one of the Ten Commandments, but not this Ten Commandment. He says, when he's talking about honoring your father and mother, he talks about not speaking evil of them, and actually uses the same word that they use here. Because, so do not speak evil of your father and mother. And so it's the same idea as, it's sort of an in-between. It's more than just saying something bad about them, but it's not quite what cursing them would be either. So this word is kind of an in-between there. We don't really have a word that directly translates into this. Do not hold grudges. Do not be double-minded, neither double-tongued, for to be double-tongued is a snare of death. Do not let your words stand empty or false, which is the word we see often in the Bible is vain. And that's what this word empty means. So when you say something, back it up. Whatever you say should be what you mean, and you should follow through on it. So this has a lot to do with contractual behavior. When you tell somebody that this is what you're going to do in regards to some sort of promise or commitment, you need to stand behind it. Now, you notice I've got these things grouped together. So what I've tried to do is put them into what we would equate with a Ten Commandments section. Because if you actually go and read the Ten Commandments in the Bible, which we're getting ready to do, it's not just one line. Do this, don't do this, don't do this. There are other things in there, and you can come up with 8 or 14, depending on how you count them. So we settled on the number 10, and that's the one we use, but that means we have to separate them in a certain way to get it to come to 10, which is kind of what I've tried to do here. I doubt that when this was done that it was intended to be 10, but that's the case. So I tried to do that here as well. Do not be covetous, nor greedy, nor a hypocrite, nor bad-mannered, nor haughty. So that could be 6 right there. But it made it into one verse in the way that they break down the Didache. So don't be covetous, don't want what others have, nor greedy, have things you don't share to make people covetous, nor a hypocrite, nor bad-mannered, which takes in a lot of stuff, nor haughty, which leads to bad manners. The next section that we're going to go into after this is very much like what I just did. It's going to take these same ideas and it's going to explain why if you do this, this is what happens, and it leads to other bad things. So it's kind of a natural progression here. But it's not, and remember I talked about how this is a collection of things that whoever collected them thought was important and put them together. So chapter 1 was one thing, chapter 2 he got somewhere else, and chapter 3 he got from somewhere else. But they follow the same progression, they follow the same ideas. 7, do not hate anyone, but here rebuke some concerning whom you should pray, but some you should love over your own soul. So starts off very simply, says, do not hate anyone. And then he says, but here. And notice I've got that H in italics. That word is actually the word ear, because hear and ear in Greek are basically the same thing. So he who has ears to hear is that same idea, and it's that word. So anyone that you want to hate, you first have to hear. You have to listen to them. Because what typically happens, as you should all know by now when you reach our age, very often the reason people hate each other is because they hate each other and they just break fellowship immediately and don't ever try to reconcile at all. And then the hate just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So the commandment here is to not hate, but hear. And then, after you hear, it's okay. Then you can rebuke some. So if they're still wrong after you hear them, you're supposed to rebuke them. But that involves what? More communication. So you don't hate, hear, and then rebuke if necessary. And then pray. Because we're trying to do this, not this. Now, this last part is interesting because this is not something that we see in the Bible anywhere either. But son, you should love over your own soul, which is what it basically says literally. So what do you think that means? After just covering that, what does that mean? Well, the way I take it is, son, you have to love even though you want to hate them. So love them more than yourself, because if it was yourself, you'd hate yourself. So love over your own soul. Go beyond what you would normally do even for yourself. So this is basically a statement of reconciliation. Don't hate, but always endeavor to rejoin fellowship. It doesn't talk about whether or not this is everyone in the world or just those who are members of the body. In the New Testament, we typically get that distinction made, that if this is not about everybody, this is the people that are in the body, in the fellowship, in the church. But there's no specification on that here, so whether it means one or the other, we just kind of have to guess. So those are the commandments in this chapter 2 of the Didache. They don't line up with the 10 Commandments, although most of the 10 Commandments are here, but not some. So I thought now would be a good time to kind of look at the 10 Commandments so we can make that comparison. So the first commandment, which I mentioned before, is you shall have no other gods before me. Most important commandment to start with. None of the other commandments matter if God is not God. So you shall have no other gods before me. That's not in the Didache. Probably because it's an assumption. Why are you reading the Didache if you don't already do this? In Exodus, it was a different situation because in Exodus, there were lots of options. The children of Israel had all these gods around them that they could worship. By the time we get to the Didache, it's pretty clear to anyone who's interested in the Didache that there's only one God. So this one became less necessary. So that's number one. Number two, you shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for the Lord your God, for I, the Lord your God, am jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. So thou shalt not make any graven images and worship them, which again in Exodus was an important thing because that was what most people did. Probably all people did in that day, is to make idols and to worship the God through the idol. But by the time, again, you get to the Didache, they were still doing this in the Greek world, but it was much less common problem. Number three, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. The commandment is don't make light of God. Take God seriously. Don't just worship him in passing, in essence. When you say God's name, and this commandment is why the Jews wouldn't say the name Yahweh. Because just to casually use his name was to disrespect him. And that's the idea with this commandment, is that don't treat God in a superficial way. Treat him in a reverenced and serious way. Again, nothing specifically like this in the commandments in the Didache. So we've gone through three and none of them made it. Number four, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. on it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or your sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So again, you could break this down into 5 or 8 commandments in within itself, but specifically the idea is to keep the Sabbath day holy, to not only not do labor yourself, but not make anyone around you do labor, including your servants. So the Sabbath was to be a complete stop of everything. And you will notice there was nothing about a day in the commandments in the Didache. So we've gone through 4. Nobody's made it. None of these have made it yet. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And I just mentioned a minute ago, Jesus repeated this one more than once, but it's not in the Didache. That's 5. Haven't gotten there yet. These look familiar. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness against your neighbor. Okay, we're starting to get some hits here. And you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. So here we get to 10, and these last 5 are all in the Didache. So these are the ones that the Didache found important. Now we've got this as number 10. Is this 1, 2, or 4 commandments? That becomes important. You'll see why in just a minute. So the 10 commandments are everybody's 10 commandments. Right? All Christianity shares the same 10 commandments. All right, I guess I did that one separately. Not the case. There's a Protestant version and a Catholic version. Did you know that?
Makes sense though.
Which one's missing from the Catholic version? Because they take that last one and break it into 2. Don't covet your neighbor's wife or anything else that your neighbor has. Because they only had 9 when they got to the end. So they needed to make that 2 so they could have 10 like they were supposed to. Which one's missing? Don't make any graven images and worship them. Why is that one missing?
Because they had icons, they had relics, they had.
If you've ever been to a Catholic anything, or seen a Catholic church, etc., there are lots of graven images around. And that happened very early on, probably, well, relative to us anyway. If they were going to have these images, which was more or less an accommodation of pagan worship, they were used to having images. They needed images. And so they decided to kick that one out. Just kick it out like it's not even there, and take it out of the list. So you skip between 1 and 2 over here and go to 3. So most people don't realize this, but that's the case. If you ever see a 10 commandments that is missing the graven image part, it's from the Catholic side of the story. So just thought I'd let you know that.
What about the Greek Orthodox?
I doubt they have that one because they're more imagey than even the Catholics are, but I don't know. I've never looked into that. So that's the commandments. So now we can jump into this third section, which I told you was going to be This is the why you don't do those things. There's a list of don't do's and then why you don't do them. So, my child, flee from all evil and from anything like it. And this harkens back to something that Paul said when he said, abstain from even from the appearance of evil. So, whether it really is evil or not, if it looks like it's evil, stay away from it. And this is the same idea. Flee from all evil and from anything like it. Do not be prone to anger. Why should you never be angry? Because it may lead to one of those other commandments. For anger leads to murder. Neither zealous, nor argumentative, or hot-tempered. For out of these things, acts of murder are born. So all of this stuff you should also not do. Here's some more commandments, because if you break these commandments, it may lead you to breaking one of the other commandments, which we consider even more important.
But didn't Jesus get hot-tempered when he flipped over the tax tables and all that?
You know, we weren't there. He may have just calmly walked over and flipped the tables. I doubt it, because also he started, he decided to start whipping people with a whip too. But maybe he was very calm about it and just, slapped them around. But more than likely he was upset, yes. So be angry, but sin not. But just in case, it's safer to just not be angry.
Just not be angry.
That's the idea here. Because even though the anger is not necessarily a sin in of itself, it leads to things. So, my child, do not be desirous. Do not covet. For the way of desire leads to fornication, nor foul-mouthed, nor of lustful eyes. For out of these things come acts of adultery. So we're going down that list that we just saw. This will lead to murder. This leads to fornication. This leads to adultery. My child, do not be a diviner. So now we're into the potions and the magic. Since this way leads to idolatry, neither an incanter, nor an astrologer, nor a purifier, nor wish to see these things or hear of them. For out of these things acts of idolatry are born. So all that astrology stuff is out the window as well. My child, do not be a liar, for the way of falsehood leads into thievery. Neither love silver nor vanity, for out of these things acts of robbery are born. So you see the logical progressions here. My child, do not be a grumbler, for this way leads to blasphemy. So, if you start grumbling a little bit, eventually you get to the grumbly part where you start blaspheming. It goes beyond just grumbling about your situation. Neither be stubborn nor evil-minded, for out of these things acts of blasphemy are born. So the more you allow yourself to get upset about your situation, but be humble, since the humble will inherit the earth. So that comes directly from the Beatitudes. Be patient and merciful and guileless and quiet and good and trembling of the words which you have heard. Do not exalt yourself nor give your soul to arrogance. Do not join your soul with the lofty, the proud, but with the righteous and lowly you should associate. Welcome the things that happen to you as good, knowing that apart from God, nothing happens. So, I'm going to go ahead and kick this in. This is maybe my favorite part of the whole Didache, and I wish this verse was in the actual New Testament, because it kind of is. It's kind of Romans 8:28, but people don't take Romans 8:28 that directly. Welcome the things that happen to you as good. It doesn't say welcome the good things that happen to you as good. It says welcome everything that happens to you as good, knowing that apart from God, nothing happens. So whatever happens to you, no matter how bad it is, where did it come from? People don't get that. They blame the devil for all that stuff. But nope, it's not the case. All right, so we saw basically repetition of the kind of commandments from the law in chapter 2. And then in chapter 3, what happens? You kind of get those repeated with a bunch more stuff thrown in there that is not as bad, but leads to the other stuff. So don't do that either. So what do we call this in our day? There's a word for this. It's legalism. We call this legalism because, so we're going to make up some rules that you have to follow, and then we're going to make up some rules to follow to avoid breaking those rules, which means there are other things the other rules you have to follow too. And eventually you end up with lots and lots of rules. So once you get these rules, you have to make up rules to make sure these don't get broken. That's how you get to legalism. And so here we are, 50, 60 years into Christianity, we've already got legalism.
It's the way.
This is why I'm spending this much time on the Didache, because it shows you how Christianity was already evolving, and there was a whole lot more evolving to happen. And the part you have to keep in mind here, so something like the Didache is something that this is the way that church was done then. This is what you would get just to make it vernacular, every Sunday when you come to church, this is what you're going to hear repeatedly, over and over and over, and you're going to start repeating it back. And it becomes what we come to call a catechism. Why was it done that way?
So, because people didn't write, for one thing.
Yeah, you didn't have a book you could take home and look at every day to remind you that this is what you're supposed to do. The only Bible you had was what got crammed into your head. So this is how, for 1,800 years, that may be an exaggeration, but pretty close to 1,800 years, this is what church was like. Because until you had everybody reading, this is what you had to do. So that's why I keep pointing out that this is what a New Testament church was. They didn't spend a lot of time singing unless they were singing something like this. They were basically just putting a tune, to put it that way, to words like this that were intended for you to be able to remember that this is how you're supposed to act. So it's real easy to you can't get really deep and philosophical about things if you have to stop at this level. If you have to spend your time burning this into people, you can't really break down on why you shouldn't do this and why you should, which is really the whole point, but you can't get to that level when you have to stay so superficial with it. And that's part of the reason that you end up with legalism. It's just really easy to teach people to stay between the ditches, even though that leads to things that are completely the opposite of what they were intended to be in the beginning. So, we've gone through 3 chapters, and who have we not met yet? Hadn't seen Jesus, Lord, or anything else in those first 3 chapters. There's another member of the Trinity that we still haven't seen. So why do you think that is? It's because this is being from a first century church, it is a very Jewish document. So its focus is, since you're focusing on what you're supposed to do and not do, It's the Levitical law. It's the Old Testament law, because we're not over the hump to the kind of things we get from Paul, because Paul is digging into the why. This never can get. Paul didn't write his letters, even though it was to be read to the whole church. He didn't expect everybody in the church to understand everything he was talking about. So he was kind of writing it at two different levels. A lot of what Paul wrote was for leadership, people who did get beyond the why, into the whys. So this is not the same kind of document. So we'll go to 4 next week and see if we can find Jesus in 4. Okay? I don't have any